I'll tell you about it in the green room because we're live now.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, I'm Brian Beutler. I write the Off Message newsletter here on Substack. I'm here with Pat Dennis, who's the president of American Bridge, the Democratic Party super PAC that he's in the process of restoring to greatness. So the backstory here is Pat and I had never actually met in person, but I took an unsolicited shot at him a couple weeks ago. A good-natured shot,
Yeah.
but it was a shot, and because of an observation he made about political persuasion. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today. Um, and he wrote a measured response to me on his new Substack, which is called Oppo Drop. People should absolutely check that out. And I figured we should actually just air out our disagreement in conversation for the benefit of readers rather than an interminable back and forth. So the precipitating incident, I'm gonna describe it now, but then I just kind of want to put a pin in it. The precipitating incident was that AI generated video that Donald Trump posted after No King's Day, which depicted him flying a fighter jet over crowds of his political opponents and then dropping sewage on them. And so, like, that's obviously par for the course for his behavior. But a bunch of online liberals, friends of ours, I guess, noticed that the next day, the hosts of the Sunday news shows, they like didn't even mention that Trump had done this thing. And like, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but this gets under people's skin for, I think, the understandable reason that, like, if any Democratic politician did that, the press would like force America into this struggle session over decorum and the loss of decorum in politics, but they don't care when Trump does it. And
Yeah.
this double standard, like, it rankles. It's why Gavin Newsom is trying to like hold up a mirror and pretend to act like Trump so that people remember that this is abnormal behavior. But you responded to, I forget whom, saying that you thought it was a good thing that the news had downplayed the poop plane scandal controversy because
Yeah.
that leaves more broadcast time in effect to devote to issues that have more persuasive power.
Yeah.
So that's where we picked it up. And before we get into like the merits of the analysis, I just want to ask you to describe for everyone watching, like what do you mean when you say persuasion? Or I guess like when political operatives say that they are doing persuasion work,
Yeah.
what do they mean? What does the machinery of persuasion work look like?
Yeah. And I could go on about this for pretty much forever. The simple version here is basically like you need a real clear idea of what your goals are, right? We're in the world of media here. You don't have like the button you push like you do with paid advertising where you decide exactly what happens, what people see, right? We're dealing with the world of earned media and like what are our priorities? And what my priorities are as somebody who is trying to win elections for Democrats going forward in the future is number one, Democrats need to establish themselves as people who aren't just focused on like being goody two shoes, like, you know, folks who are just worried about decorum, right? And this post from Trump was designed to trap us into talking about issues of like, is this appropriate instead of what the Sunday shows actually talked about. But what the Sunday shows talked about is really important to what I'm talking about with persuasion, because that weekend they were covering number one, the No Kings protest, which had a very disciplined, like straight up message. But the other key story they covered, which ended up being extraordinarily important, was the expiring Obamacare healthcare subsidies. And like, look, number one issue for voters who aren't plugged into politics going into 2026 is going to be like economy, cost of living, some portion of that.
The
But number
kitchen
two is,
table issues, right?
yeah, number two is either going to be healthcare or it's going to be immigration. And that's like a big part of what this fight is over. And it's, are they thinking about healthcare or are they thinking about whatever random migrant caravan they're going to invent before 2026, right? And this was talking about healthcare, an issue they trust us on. So number one, we're trying to persuade people that Democrats think about things that impact your lives instead of just like random issues. But we're also essentially trying to set what the issue area is, which does a different kind of persuasion, which is kind of persuading people whether or not they should turn out. Because you don't change a lot of voters' minds, but the issues that are talked about, Epstein files is a great example here, activates or deactivates partisan voters and whether or not they're going to go vote. So we're far out from an election, but that's sort of the initial framing.
But when I talk about like the machinery of persuasion work,
Yeah.
I'm thinking more like how is it that people who do your job,
Yeah.
come to determine or make determinations about what issues are persuasive to people versus
Yeah.
what they don't care
Yeah.
about or distractions. So I'm thinking like
Yeah.
message tests, survey data,
For
focus
sure.
groups.
And we do.
But like
Yeah.
when you go to work, what are you drawing from when you're making like writing strategy memos about
Yeah.
what the kinds of things people should say, the kind of ads they should make, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. And we just did a huge project on this called the Working Class Project. We did literally dozens of focus groups, and people roll their eyes out of the back of their heads when they hear focus groups, right? Because it sounds like you're, doing some kind of insane corporate thing. You're just going to come out of there with like a message. But no, what this literally is taking a bunch of guys or women and, people who will vote, who don't care that much about politics, and literally just sitting them in a room and like asking them like these questions. These people live very different lives than somebody like me who's like sitting in an office in Washington, D.C. And they tell us like what issues they care about, what they worry about, what they're going to be, thinking about when they go to the polls. And like by and large, like number one, they're like, you Democrats really suck. You're really focused on people who are not like me. And then they're like, I can't afford anything. My job sucks. I can't find another job. My nephew just graduated from college, can't find a job. And this is like the only thing I care about. And you guys are also focused on your Washington, D.C. bullshit. Um, and that is something that I've heard so many times now that like I just refuse to allow myself to say that anything else is important. Like nothing else is important. It's just like those people. And, the back and forth in DC, it just tells those people that's not what we're focused on. We're focused on what you should be allowed to post on social media, which they're like, who gives a shit? Yeah.
So okay, so you have qualitative methods, quantitative methods. Like
Yeah.
a focus group is, I'd say, more qualitative than quantitative, but a message
Right.
test is meant to be a little bit more quantitative, and then a survey is just data, right?
Yeah.
And
But they all say pretty much the same thing.
yes, but
Yeah.
the same issues rise to the top when you run those tests each time. And so, just as a follow up question, when someone takes a message test and responds well to a healthcare message, or when healthcare rises to the top of issues in a poll, or when focus group participants seem to all agree that the price of prescription drugs is a big problem, how do you ascertain whether or not they understand those things as political issues, right? Like is it
Yeah.
not? I encounter people like the one time I went door knocking for the 2024 election. It didn't work. We lost.
Yeah.
I just like met a
Dumb
lot
move.
of people who it was like sort of like the first time I'd gone out just talking to people that were low information, but by design. And like, I did not get the sense that they necessarily understood that when they encounter challenges in their economic lives, that they really think this is a policy failure or something
Oh,
policymakers
yeah.
should address. So I'm going to do the research. I'm going to look up the candidates, figure out which one's the likeliest to address this, and I'm going to vote for that person, right? Like
Yeah.
that, like healthcare might really suck for them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're thinking about politics. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So we are getting into here a world where there have been literally thousands of academic papers written about what goes on in people's heads when they're
Mhm.
deciding who to vote for, right? I will say you can take a lot of complicated models here, but the simplest way to deal with this, and in my mind, the most effective, is literally just to ask these people, right? And if you do that kind of systemically and write it down, like, there's a lot of impacts. Not to go like too far out in the weeds, there are a lot of people who just see who they like. You see this with like extremely charismatic candidates. This is a person who I like. I identify with them. I will then backfill my
Yep.
policy preferences to
Mhm.
match theirs. Like that's a very common thing, right? The fact of the matter is, all that stuff doesn't really matter, right? Because you have a really likable candidate, they'll backfill their policy positions. You have a not very likable candidate. The fact, the things that they like, right? The things that's sitting behind all of that in their brain is like, it's like a general sense of like is this person looking out for me? Is this somebody I can trust, right? And like I can tell you, like literally going back to 2016, Donald Trump's superpower was his ability to short circuit that by forcing us to seem like different people than we actually are, to seem like people who are so focused on making somebody behave politely online that like we just like don't like none of that other stuff gets to them, right? It's just, these people are puppets dancing to whatever Donald Trump says they should dance about. And meanwhile, I can't like afford college. So that's sort of how I approach it, right? And this goes back to so many incredible attacks against Donald Trump that would have killed any other candidate. He was like defrauding people who just wanted to get Trump Institute was one of my favorite attacks that we worked on back then. And he had plagiarized all this stuff and was selling it to people for tens of thousands of dollars as this is how you're going to get rich, right? And that was a front page New York Times story. It was everywhere. And Donald Trump completely changed the media cycle by being a jerk, right? And that just meant we were talking about Trump being a jerk. And it was disastrous, honestly, in the end.
So, okay. So, like, here's where I start to feel
Yeah.
like parting ways.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the things that bubbled to the top of this research do seem like the kind of things where, like, me talking to a voter, particularly a voter who knows me, like, I can persuade them, I think, that whatever ideas they had about politics from growing up or from their hometowns or from their spouses or whatever, that like Democrats are by far the safer bet. If you're worried about access to healthcare, the price of healthcare, like the Republican Party policy platform for decades has been to make that stuff harder to access, more expensive, and they have like philosophical reasons for it. And if that
Yeah.
really is what you care about, there's only one choice for you, right?
But what about good paying jobs? Like that's the one where, yeah.
Well, sure, but this is like when you're talking about a universe of millions of voters,
Yeah.
you can't have a million intimate conversations with somebody, right? And you can try to like target people with persuasive messaging on these issues, like hit your spots where you can. You're on Meet the Press, so you pivot to healthcare or whatever. And like maybe you get somebody briefly, but then they're going to
Mhm.
go back to their milieus, right? They're going to go back to their workplaces, their whatever, their schools, and they're going to return to the television programming that they normally watch, and they're like going to be rebombarded with the just kind of ambient information, right? And
Oh
like,
yeah.
and this is why I feel like whenever there's an opportunity or something happens in the news and it paints your opponent in a bad light, there's a value in not overthinking it and just being like, yeah, that person's bad, because that's ultimately why I think a huge majority of the country has such a low opinion of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's not like, oh, I turned on the TV and I was disappointed to see them talking about Trump instead of healthcare. It's that it, like the information environment is filled with slanders about Democrats,
So
and
y-
and like that eventually will like reassert itself in people's minds over the targeted persuasive message that you really nail. Do you
so yes, I totally understand what you're saying. I think one major disagreement here is Donald Trump posting a video of himself in a fighter jet dropping excrement on people, Donald Trump being sexist to reporters. There is a general sense that like these are things that are really damaging to Donald Trump, and I would like them to be really damaging to Donald Trump. Donald Trump does them for a very specific reason. And it's because those things help him. Like they just do. They help him in two ways, right? They solidify his this is just a guy, this is just a regular guy like me message, and they force his opponents to just go off the wall and like not be able to focus. And if you look at Donald Trump, what actually drives his numbers up and down, right? During the 2024 campaign, the only period where Trump dude's had terrible numbers forever, but like was pretty likable was his period of greatest message discipline on affordability, right? He just really focused on it during the campaign, really hammered us on it. And now that he's off that and he's governing the country in such an erratic way, his numbers have crashed. And like, that's just, that's just how it is, unfortunately. Like, you just got to talk about the stuff that really matters to people. And he used to do it and he was popular. And now he doesn't really do it anymore and he's unpopular. And it's like, we don't have a lot of levers we can pull, but like, that's a good one.
So, okay. I mean, I do understand that like asking, like demanding Donald Trump be more respectful to reporters or
Yeah.
female reporters in particular would be a weird thing for the Democratic Party to take like a particular interest in. And
Yeah.
like my real disappointment there is that like the press corps itself just does not stand up for itself. And
Yes.
that's, I mean, we could figure out how those two things overlap with each other, but like the airplane video, um, you know, a bad politician might be like, he should be more polite to us online. A better
Yeah.
politician might be like, this is somebody who thinks that if you disagree with him, that you should be bombarded with shit, and that like that's funny.
Yeah.
And like he, like not. It's not necessarily the thing that you need to stop on a dime and never talk about healthcare again until everyone knows about the poop story. But
Yeah.
that like it is bad, and it's not hard to explain to people why you should expect better of the president of the United States, right?
Yeah.
And that is fixed period of or fixed quantity of content, right? Where consensus formed that he did something really shitty to people. I mean, whatever, no pun not intended. Um, and I feel like it's like the training where you try to make it so that Democrats don't do that sometimes lands them in this uncanny valley where it's like there's a conversation that is kind of gurgled to the surface naturally, or maybe Donald Trump forced it to the surface, and you're like unwilling to engage in it. You're just like
Yeah.
racing to get off to a different topic, and the people
Yeah.
are like they can kind of sniff that, and they're like, why not just address what's right in front of you?
Yeah, and this is we used to be in a much simpler world of like 24-hour news cycles, right? And you would try to win the news cycle and you would approach each day and it's, are we going to elevate this? Are we going to try to bury this? And now there's, you know, 50, 100, 24-hour news cycles. And my basic idea of this is like, yeah, like you're going to be missing conversations. Like you cannot engage in every conversation that's going on right now. Like this conversation may have been very important to people like us. There was, probably 50 other things going on that day that persuadable voters were thinking about and caring about. There's a group of like moderate Republicans who probably were very fired up about something going on in foreign policy, in Ukraine or something. There's a different conversation about Venezuela. And you just got to pick your conversations because so much of this comes down to like what in the stack of 50 news cycles that are happening, which is at the top of the stack, right? And you got to try to boost the news cycles that are helping you and get more people involved in that conversation and fewer involved in the one that hurts you. And that's sort of the media strategy that we engage in, and it leads to weird situations, right? And like the thing that I also wanted to talk about is the number of levers we have to pull. Like I, as somebody who runs a Democratic super PAC, somebody over on the Hill who's a senator or a member of the House, the number of things they can do is actually very limited, right? All you choose is what you talk about. And, somebody like me, I can drop oppo in the media and time that specifically and like, do paid advertising and things like that. But ultimately, none of these things are determinative. They are all just going into the pool of what happens. And it's such a blunt object. You got to just focus on the stuff boosting the stuff that is helpful. And to me, like that's just what the voters tell you they think is important. And that's like healthcare and the economy.
I guess, but in the realm of earned media, right? Like
Yeah.
people are just going to confront you with questions. Like you can't program Kristen Welker to only ask you about the issues that perform best in your quantitative analysis, right? Like she's going to ask you about the poop plane, or she's going to ask you about Venezuela, which you might reason to yourself is not as safe ground as healthcare. And
Yeah.
and like I feel like we're talking about the difference between a party where the median member is freewheeling and loose enough to roll with the punches,
I
no matter
mean,
what gets asked of them,
you
versus
get
one
F.
that gets really stiff and anxious when they're off the safe ground.
Well,
The second ones are better at going back to what's persuasive, but they're less fluid as politicians. Does that make sense?
for sure, but I tell you that talented politicians and the new mayor of New York is the expert at this, can turn any issue back to the persuadable issue, right? It is what is going, I'm sitting on TV, tell me your position on what's going on in Venezuela. And I think it is a disaster that our president, who came into office planning, promising to bring down prices, is now focused on starting a new war overseas, something he promised not to do, while people are paying his grocery tax on tariffs. And now you're just talking about the thing people care about, right? It's a basic pivot. Like, this is how you have to do it. And people who are much more talented communicators than me, from Obama to Mamdani, like, they are able to do that in a way that is authentic, a way that is persuasive, and a way that like keeps our issues where they need to be. The fact of the matter is, Democrats need to be practicing this way more and not acting like interviews are existential crises. But yes.
Well, yeah, I think, like, it's not just that's going through their head. It's like, what if I say the wrong thing and people think I'm soft on Maduro? Or,
Yeah.
like there, I feel like the whole process of calculating how
Yeah.
to get back can like spin people into like seeming very tense, awkward.
Yeah. You got to
And
practice till they can't see it anymore, but you still got to do it.
okay, well, so you wrote in your response to me that the Democratic Party's brand is disastrously bad. We need to dig out of this deficit, and the only way
Yes.
to do that is to convince voters that it's possible for Democrats to care about issues that directly matter to voters. This isn't rocket science, but it requires focus and discipline, and
Yeah.
that's essentially what you've been saying here. But so, like, what is your version of the story that explains how the Democratic Party's brand became disastrously bad? Is it just that they started getting offended by the things Donald Trump was doing, or like when you tell yourself the story of the
Yeah.
Democrats going from their high water mark under Obama to where they are now, what happened?
So it's a long, complicated series of things, and I'm not going to get into, the cultural changes, and I have no interest in, engaging in the woke wars. But I can tell you that as a political operative, I spent my entire life working on campaigns and now working for super PACs. To me, the 2019 Democratic primary was ground zero for all of this. Essentially, a world where the greatest like crop of up and coming Democrats all got on stage in front of the nation and competed on just out like appealing to a group of very limited voters who are very different from what people in the swing universe care about, right? And you had arguments there over like, is a $5 trillion climate bill big enough? You had just like a constant run to the left. And I do separate my actual ideological opinions from optimal political strategy in a lot of ways. But what I saw was basically every Democrat going up on stage and saying, we are a party that is like tripping over itself to run to the left in a country where there is a very solid majority for Democrats to be had, but just people aren't that far out there, and we defined ourselves for a long time. And Joe Biden came out of that successfully, I think, because of that dynamic. But as he sort of faded, there was nobody there to pick up the ball and run with it.
Okay, so I mean, I would agree with you that people who didn't win the primary adopted policy positions that I would regard as unwise to adopt.
Yeah.
And like, and to me, it's less like what precisely does this issue poll at, and more like, don't do stupid shit. Like, if something is polling in the 20s, just don't. Like
Mm-hmm.
you got
Don't
a
write it
lot
down.
of birth, right?
Discipline.
Like a 40% policy idea isn't necessarily deadly if you can like stand behind it with conviction and it's moral and blah blah blah. And some of the
Yeah.
ideas that rose to the surface in that primary were like not good if they come to brand the party. But like
Yes.
they didn't, right? Like Biden won the
Mm.
primary, and then like Black Lives Matter summer happened that same year. And then Democrats won the election pretty handily. And like I saw the bottom fall out after, right? Like Biden had a honeymoon period for 6-7 months. And really that's when everyone was like, who the fuck are these guys? We hate them. And I mean, I'm not saying that like
Yeah.
some of the stuff from 2019 couldn't have factored into it. But like, I also think like we all kind of suspect voters have short memories about stuff. Like the timelines seem out of sync.
So voters have short memories. If you had asked somebody what Beto O'Rourke's climate proposal was in 2022, who's a regular voter, they wouldn't be able to tell you, but they remember their impression, which is like these guys, like, I don't remember what they said, but they were all way further out there than I would. And like, I'm a moderate Democrat, but I voted for Biden. Those kind of people. There is just a dynamic that people forget, that Biden came into office and really like put in and empowered a lot of like extremely left-wing people. And look, there are reasons to do that. And one of the arguments is you take big swings on policy, you deliver on policy, and then people see that and then vote for you. And our success in 2022 was really buoyed that argument. But I would argue our success in 2022 came uh, because Roe versus Wade got shot down. Like, and that had nothing to do. That was a run to the political extremes, right? And that really boosted Democrats. But at the same time, like the Biden administration, you know, was I like the Inflation Reduction Act where it landed, right? I think that was a great bill. I think it had a really smart series of investments and policies, but we preceded that with like a huge argument about how uh, before Joe Manchin got in there, a huge argument about how we can do the biggest, most left wing bills since FDR, right? And people remember that about Democrats. And it just put a bad taste in their mouth. And like my ideological like opinions separately, like that just happened and we need to deal with it.
So, I mean, okay. So let's situate ourselves in 2022. Roe v.
Yeah.
Wade is overturned. Super important. Trump is not on the ballot. Also important. The
Yeah.
people who are on the ballot are disproportionately like Trumpers, and that's a gift to Democrats because the people who try to do Trump but aren't Trump tend to be really bad candidates, right? So
that's our specialty here at American Breed, just taking those people down.
just
Yeah.
elevate those people, right? And just knock on wood all the time.
Yeah.
2022 inflation is high. Like that's when you would expect that, like people's view that the Democratic Party was out of touch with them economically would have been at its peak.
Mhm.
And they did basically fine in that election. It was the next election, this past election, where Trump won again, what inflation was back down. And Joe Biden had spent his whole presidency like focused on full employment, increasing real wages.
Yeah.
And he got it. Like he did the soft landing. It was the best economy I've lived through. Or maybe the late 90s. I don't know. And people were just miserable about it. And they really thought Democrats were out of touch economically. And it's like, but all they've done for the last 4 years is run this experiment about targeting jobs in the swing states, good manufacturing jobs, getting overall unemployment down. And they did it. Like, and I think that if you had told yourself back in the summer of 2020, hey, Joe Biden's going to do this. There's going to be a spike in inflation, but real wages will outpace it. He's going to have an industrial policy that focuses on the swing states. It's going to work. And then by the time he runs for re-election, it's going to be 3.8% unemployment, 3% inflation, 2.5 maybe. You would have said he's going to be a lock for re-election, right? And I would have too. And I mean, like, I don't want to like pretend like I saw this all coming. I'm curious why in that period of time, 4 years removed from the 2019 primary, people came to this idea that came to this conclusion that Democrats don't care about issues that matter directly to voters. And like the story I tell myself is that starting in like the 70s, I guess, but really in the 90s and then accelerating every year thereafter is like Republicans have chewed up more and more and more of like the information architecture in the country, right? And so it's like if 70-ish% of Americans strongly dislike Democrats, I'd guess that more than half of that 70% strongly dislike Democrats because they're just immersed in information environments where people are slagging on Democrats constantly, right? Like, you can have a whole presidency like focused in like myopically on full employment, and they'll think Democrats only care about trans people using the bathroom, right? Or like what you're calling a high school in San Francisco, like is George Washington a figure that we should cancel, right? Like that really wasn't what the main actors in democratic politics were up to, but it's what people came to believe about them. And that's because there's just this fire hose of information telling a subset of the country that's all that Democrats care about. So that
Yeah.
explains, like, to me, I think, more than half of the 70%. And then the rest is like Democrats who don't like Democrats. And why is that? It's
Yeah.
like I don't think we're like, because they're so focused on open borders and trans people, it's like we see an existential threat to our way of life, and they're our last line of defense, and they're not really fighting it. They're not really protecting us. They're actually trying to turn every conversation away from the things that really unsettle us the most. So of course we don't have a high opinion of them. And you add it all
Yeah.
up, and that's like a party that has 28% or whatever it is, like, approval, and that's the toxic brand that you're talking about. But if you
Yeah.
want to fix that, like, you can't go back in time to 2019.
Yeah.
You need to, I think, like, have a bit more spine. And then, but B, you really need to fight for parity in the information environment.
Yeah.
And like, to me, that means when the poop plane thing happens, you just don't hesitate to take a swing about it. And, you wrote, like, I thought it was a really, like, good point, and it crystallizes something that people like me who have no campaign experience really do need to think about, is this fallacy of the first time candidate who gets really annoyed by the mean things that their opponent says about them, calls them a communist or whatever. That can be really upsetting to somebody who's running for office for the first time, but they tend not to sweat it when the same opponent says, and they're going to increase your taxes, because it's like they think that's just boring stuff. And really, their intuitions are backwards. It's like the fear that you're going to raise taxes is the thing that will sink you, and you can really handle being called a bad name, right? And you should not sweat that. And
Yeah.
I think that's like a very well taken point, with the asterisk that if it's not just your candidate calling you a communist, but that, like, Twitter is filled with people calling you communist, and so is Fox News, and you don't do anything about that, or at least try to fight that to a draw in some sense. Your refutations about your, like, their claims about your tax policy are not going to help. Like, you really do need to do something about the fact that everyone is drowning in slanders about you. And if you don't have a plan for that, I just
Yeah.
pivoting to healthcare is just not gonna,
No,
like, and so
I
you need
agree.
to, so persuasion has to be about mass psychology as much as, like, what does an individual say their